There we go. Get cozied up here, Raj.
Okay.
I've got the couch pretty well centered today. There we go.
And just so our audio listeners know, you'll hear us make references to what people can see. We do a live YouTube video when we're doing this. So when you hear us talking about what people can see, or Raj scooting closer to Bruce or whatever, you're missing out on that. But you don't have to. You can actually find it somewhere
on YouTube.
Yeah, just Inglorious Pastords somewhere.
Inglorious Pastords or Bruce W. Martin. There's nothing about Roger in there, so don't type in Roger. You're not going to find anything.
Do you think we're better when people see us? Do you think that it's more fun?
Yes, I think it's more fun because when we laugh, they laugh. And we laugh a lot, and then they can see us laughing. And when you see someone laughing, it just brightens your day.
And people may think, the people who listen to the audio, they might think that we literally have a Roger laugh track.
No, he's actually laughing.
But I know you look live and say Roger has really a problem with laughing.
Right. You have a chuckle issue.
It's a chuckle issue.
It's a chuckle issue. It's a chuckle. See, there you go. He just chuckled again.
No, I had to get it out. I felt I needed it was building up. I was holding it back because we were talking about it.
Big news, Roger. Big news.
Okay? Oh, how big is this news?
Well, for the second time in 16 years, Tennessee beat Florida. And I realized that was a week or so ago, but I was in the wilderness climbing mountains, and so I missed the game. And they won handily, and that's just huge because that's their nemesis year after year after year. So I'm very excited about what's next for Tennessee. I mean,
they're in the top 10. They're ranked in the top 10.
They're 8 in the country.
8, right?
I think they play after LSU. It's Alabama and then Georgia. So that should be a fun little run there.
It basically means
this is the one year I wish we were playing Auburn. Sorry, Auburn fans.
Oh,
good times.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So that was the first thing. It's so funny. The first thing I checked when we got out of the woods after seven days.
Oh, I thought about you.
I'm coming down the mountain. Actually, I was up on top of Whitney because you can get signal up there. I'm like, Tennessee football.
Did you check Vols or Broncos first?
Oh, Vols.
Okay. That's Broncos, what I think I would have guessed that.
In an 18-game season, the Broncos, even if they lose that weekend, there's so much that, I found out they won.
Right.
11-10.
11-9.
Yeah.
No, 11-10.
11-10.
11-10.
Super game. I know that was a fun one to watch.
Oh, yeah. People are saying that's one we're going to be watching for years and years to come.
Just the defensive struggle. How we love it.
It was, I think more than one person I saw said that game was unwatchable.
Yeah, it was blacked out, not because it was just blacked out.
It was just, wanted to see I'm sorry, we can't inflict this anymore. So we're going to show now an Andy Griffith rerun.
Yeah. And then we come back against Las Vegas, who is 0-3, and give them their first win. Although Russell Wilson played well, two touchdowns, 100, basically a 125 quarterback rating, which is very good. So I think we're going to turn it around. I think the defense is still solid. I think we need to get a running back that can run with the ball. He runs great without it. It's just with the ball it becomes a problem.
Well, is he now they had a running back injury.
We lost one running back to injury.
You didn't lose the fumbler?
No, the fumbler's still with us.
Oh no!
But I have an idea they're going to have to go outside.
The non-fumbler was in.
They might have to do a mid-season trade or something to get a running back, maybe a Leonard Fournette.
Yeah, but he's with Tampa, right?
Is he with Tampa? I thought he was with the Patriots.
No. I think
he's with Tampa. I get them confused now since Tom Brady's not with the Patriots.
And I'm going to tell you this: well, Leonard Fournette is with Tom Brady.
Okay.
That's where the confusion is. But in their game Monday night, I think Leonard Fournette had net minus rushing yards. They had 6 rushes in that game, and I think they had 3 total yards rushing.
So we're not looking for that pickup.
I'm just saying Leonard may not be
the guy. Okay, I got it.
Unless it's one of those, he just needs a change of scenery.
Well, and that, sometimes that's the case. I mean, but when you're on the team with Tom Brady, the line is probably more concerned about protecting Tom than creating opportunities for Leonard. I don't know. Yeah. I've never thought about that until right this minute. I mean, if you've got the greatest quarterback of all time behind you, they're probably thinking more about protection than Leonard getting some yards.
Right. I think the thing is,
I mean, you might actually play defensively.
Here's the thing. Sense. Yeah, if we were going to lose one of the two for the season, Leonard or Tom.
Yeah, Lenny's gone.
Let's just go send him onto the hospital.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to make that. And what's remarkable, even in that game, which they lost, but scored a decent number of points. They're deep,
31.
But Tom is throwing into almost the entire game. There ain't no running game.
No.
So it's always impressive what a quarterback can do when there's literally zero running game.
That was John Elway, and all the years we had Sammy Winder as our running back, and then that we would run it for 3 quarters, and then Dan Reeves would decide, well, I guess we can't win running the ball. Why did John Elway have more fourth quarter comebacks than anyone in the history of the world? Because Dan Reeves wanted to run the ball for 3 quarters with Sammy Winder.
And then fourth quarter, he would let Elway cook.
Well, yeah, so it turns out. And I'm like, what? Couldn't we have done that for the first 3 quarters too? That's just me, though. Hey, I don't know if you know this, but the Patriots were down to their number 3 quarterback on Sunday, who is a high school player out of Kentucky, and he threw his first NFL touchdown.
Right. Last name Zappy.
Zappy. I was like, Bill Belichick just has a way. I was just trying to think, of the draft room, and Bill Belichick's like, okay, I got our next pick. And they're like, oh, they're all bated breath. Like, Zappy Yappy. What's his
Bailey
name?
Zappy.
Bailey Zappy out of Western Kentucky.
You can't make this stuff up.
And they're like, Bill, hey, can someone get some coffee? I think Bill's tired. We're deep in the draft here.
Here's the thing. Bill can always go to, remember what I did in the 6th round?
Tom Brady.
2000. Yep. So
I mean, he can pull that card the rest of his life. Let's face it.
No, they needed to. It was a good pickup. I think he had led the nation in passing yards last year. Crazy. So in college, so it's always a question how you adapt.
Followed closely by Hendon Hooker.
But then you have your first NFL game. And by the way, another record. I just saw this. So the record Bailey Zappy set, or a milestone, is the only quarterback to play their first NFL game at Lambeau Field and throw a touchdown.
I did see that. That's the reason I read that article. It was like Zappy gets a first or something.
Okay.
Like, what's a Zappy? I didn't even know who a Zappy was, and I didn't know it was a first and at Lambeau Field and all that. So
no, he acquitted himself well. The moment didn't look too big, which is encouraging because Mac Jones is probably out a few more weeks.
Yeah. So and the other thing good for both of our teams is the AFC is just beating each other up. So I think you have 3 teams that are 3 or 4 teams that are 3-1. Everyone else is 2-2, 1-2. So we're right in the thick of it.
And I think
even the Patriots.
The good news for the Patriots is I think the 3 teams that have beaten them are all 3-1.
3-1 teams. Yeah.
And they've played 3 games on the road, 3 of their 4 games on the road. So
yeah,
they need to beat Detroit this week.
Yeah, that would be important. If you can't beat Detroit, it could be a long year.
I saw this other stat. I don't know. What's the term we use? I don't know if we can use post-pandemic, because I know there's still some level of, COVID's still a thing and people are still losing their lives, but it's not what it once was. So you look at the aftermath, and I think we're always going to be talking about the world pre-COVID versus the world post, or on the back edge of COVID. But I saw a fascinating thing that suggests people now engaging in much riskier behaviors. So that was fascinating.
Interesting.
Speeding is way up. Deaths from automobile accidents and speeding are up substantially. Substance abuse up. And the take of this one piece that I was reading is, was people just taking more chances, more let it fly. I was just thinking the dynamic of that, and if any part of that is,
well, the reality is we're all going to die.
Well, thanks, Bruce.
Well, and maybe
there's a reminder for all of you today.
Maybe COVID brought that to the fore for some people. I think we've lived with an understanding of that. Scripture's very, every man it is appointed unto every man wants to die, and after this judgment. So, in some ways, when people look at my life, some people look at me like I take a lot of risks or I do some risky sorts of things, and I probably don't have. I probably don't have the same fear of death that some do. I don't know whether that's healthy or unhealthy, but I do live in a world of, number one, we are all going to die. Number two, as C.S. Lewis said, most of us poorly, which is sobering, but I am very much looking forward to next. I live in a world of next is going to be so cool. In other words, if the old order, with all of its brokenness, but with all of its beauty, last week I'm out in the beauty of a broken world, which is extraordinary. Then I very much am looking forward to this new order that Jesus talks about, where he'll be our God and we'll be his people, and there'll be no more death or dying or sickness or tears because the old order of things has passed away. So when I think of death, for me, it's not, oh no, what a terrible thing. I don't want to die poorly. Going to point two. When I say
what's dying poorly? What do you mean by that?
Long, excruciatingly painful, years and years and years of loss of quality of life kind of death. A fall off a cliff, die in seconds, good. Jump out of an airplane, hit the ground, good. That die in your sleep. I bet there's probably a survey been done on if you had to die, most people would say they would want to die in their sleep. Yeah. So you don't even know that it's happening. In other words, you're not fearing it, you're not anticipating it, just happens. But I didn't come here to talk about death today, Raj.
I was very much there is one other fascinating little death thing I saw in the news.
Okay. Tell us about death.
Because oh gosh, my mind is well, first of all, I resonate
you were tracking with the I've got people doing more risky things.
Yes.
Sometimes I have to
I'm
help
like
Roger.
You in the same way that I laughably, this is funny, is like I'm not afraid of dying, but I'm afraid of dying in an airplane. And I realize,
isn't that interesting?
Because it would be prolonged. It's like there's a certain point, this is not going well.
We're going down.
And it's like it's I realize the funny thing where I have to laugh at myself. Yeah, I'm not afraid of dying, that's gonna happen, but how you die could kind of be, if it's like really prolonged, that just seems like unfun.
And I thought it's funny you say that because I fly so much now, which I didn't before, but I fly so much now. And I've thought about that, because every now and then they're playing a little thing and you're like, if it goes down, I'm like, I think I would just sit here and just kind of what? I just don't know that it would even bother me. Like early on when I was flying, I was like, oh, well, I would have an absolute panic attack. And when are we going to hit the ground? When are we going to hit the ground? When are we going to hit the ground? I'm like, well, eventually we're going to hit the ground. So I don't. Yeah,
it's not right. It's not that I even say I would be frantic.
I've gotten used to it.
Yeah, it's just maybe not wanting a ton of time to think about it.
I know. I don't. Yeah, I totally get
so that. It's just funny. But the last piece on death, and then I'll let you talk about something life-giving. Is no, I read this. That this is funny. There's a place in Iceland where you're not allowed to die. You're not allowed to die in that town. It's against the law. I'd read.
Not sure how you enforce that.
Well, so the backstory, and whatever I'm getting wrong with the story or whatever, the backstory is they discovered in this very frigid climate where that bodies in cemeteries wouldn't decompose.
Oh yeah, they would just be frozen forever.
And but I think it came into play. Someone dies with a disease, or there's some kind of a thing that can be a contaminant.
And if it ever thawed, you got the disease back.
So when someone is nearing death, they have to leave town. There's whatever. If your death is imminent, you cannot stay in town. You can't remain.
Yeah, I'm just like, again, the enforcement of that, the death penalty.
What do we?
You died in town. Well, now you're really going to die because that's very interesting. I hadn't thought about a body not decomposing and the problems that could create.
Right.
Because they have bodies on Everest that they've left on Everest
that
are still on Everest, which is such that's a whole fascinating thing. Because you could get them down, but they don't. There's actually turns that are named after people at different turns, like the guy with the green boots. There's a turn on Everest but the body's never going to decompose.
Right.
It's too cold. It's just it's on ice for the rest of history. Fascinating.
Okay.
So here's what I was thinking this morning. I've been in John chapter 4, and I've just been stuck there and just staying there and reading more of it and reading about it and then studying words that are in that thing. And I talked to you a little bit this Monday night, I think, when we got together for dinner. Thanks for dinner. That was great.
Happy to help.
Roger and I living next door has become a real boon for Marlene and I, as in we get free dinner a lot.
They have a restaurant next door, as it turns out.
It turns out. I mean, it's great. And Roger.
I love cooking. And
Roger, have you ever said, hey, do you guys want to come over for dinner? Have you ever heard the words no?
Can't recall that there's been don't think we can do it tonight, Raj.
Nope. We may have already had something cooked inside, and I'm like, we're going to put that in the freezer. Roger offered food. Let's just go over there and get that.
I have loved living next door, though. That has been fun.
I have loved it too.
Yeah,
I've been surprised how easy that's been. I mean, granted, moving into an 850 square foot house has been different, as in you're literally everything's within 20 feet of you. It's just different. I remember having to go across a house and through a living room and a kitchen and to get to a thing.
Right.
Well, not anymore.
Oh.
Everything is within one room of you.
The problem is you're going to put on weight. You're not walking nearly as much.
Oh, well, I don't think that's going to be a problem with as much hiking as I do. But the houses have this center. It's not a hallway, but it is. But it's
a hub.
It's a hub. That's what I'm saying. It's a center hub. And there's 4 rooms off that hub.
Off the hub.
So you go
to the hub and you got 3 options.
Yep.
Or go back where you came from.
It's super easy. The other thing I thought about, we need to create a fence between, so I can go out the back door and get to your house, because it seems weird having to come through the front door
and then come
then through your
I'm
back.
sure we can work that out.
So we need to put a white picket fence there, take out the chain link, and just have a fence so we can go in and out. And
we've also now installed a dinner bell on our back deck,
which is wonderful. Roger,
so we can just ring that,
ding, 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 ding.
And now there's this Pavlovian thing. Marlena and Bruce just start walking. They hear the bell.
It's like the Walking Dead, except it's the Walking Hungry. So we do that, and
the Walking Fed.
The Walking Fed. That's good. That's when we go back home. But back to John chapter 4.
John 4.
So, and this is, I'm curious to get your take on this on air, first time without any. When I tell you beforehand, what is that word I'm looking for?
I don't know if people believe that we go unscripted, that we literally
we do. We have no idea what we're going to talk about.
Come in with
but we don't.
And you can't imagine how much angst that can create for me, having no idea what Bruce is going to bring up. And this is what you're about ready to do now. Bruce is going to drop something on. He's going to ask me some extraordinarily controversial question.
So, John chapter 4, Jesus is talking to the Samaritan woman, and there's so much richness in that story. But
I love, John 4 is just
and just staying with that is, she asked this question at one point, and she goes, now, our teachers say that we should be worshiping on this mountain, Mount Gerizim, I think, or Gilboa, one of the two. I
think it's Gerizim.
Gerizim. Yeah. And your teachers say that we should be worshiping Jerusalem. Again, why she's even posing the question, don't know totally, but Jesus goes, well, a time's coming that you're neither going to worship on that mountain or in Jerusalem. In fact, a time is coming that God's...
And now is.
Where the people who worship God will worship him in spirit and truth. Worship the Father will worship in spirit. He didn't say God there. He said the Father will worship in spirit and truth. And because this is what the Father desires, worshipers who worship in spirit and truth. So spirit, of course, means pneuma. And I've had he says God is spirit. So you have to worship in spirit. In other words, there's something metaphysical about that statement. God is spirit. We should worship him in spirit. But it's the thing of truth that I'm also spending a lot of time on. The actual Greek word that's used there, literally in multiple settings where that word's used, it means the best American sort of translation of that is unconcealed. So when we think of truth, spirit and truth, we often think of factual or accurate. This is true because it's factual or accurate. And yet he'll say you'll worship in unconcealedness. You're going to be worship in truth. Now, and of course, it fits what Jesus talked about. A lot of the worship in their day was for people to see. It was this external thing. They had all sorts of external rules, external worship things, the ceremonial washing of hands, which Jesus didn't do, which was this external thing, a part of their worship, external thing. But Jesus, when I read that, it made me think more about worshiping God internally from the heart, but also from sincerity with integrity, not just for people to see, not a bunch of externals. It's spirit and truth. But that is not what I talked about. I wanted to talk about this idea that when you read people like Richard Rohr or Brian McLaren or people in that world, they'll talk a tremendous amount about dualism and losing dualistic thinking or eliminating dualistic thinking. The idea being that everything is right or wrong. Everything at some point is right or wrong. And I realize how often I fall in that camp of just dualist thinking. Something must be right or wrong. And even the question that she posed is a dualistic sort of question. Is it right or wrong to worship here? Or is it right or wrong to worship there? I'm just curious what you think about the concept of dualism and the concept of some Christian leaders who would say we need to eliminate that from our thinking. Dualistic thinking is not helpful.
Well, I think, yeah, terms get used in all different ways by different people. Yep. So that can be a challenge if I'm kind of taking the term dualism. What I can talk about is even something I think we touched on. We were talking with Marie, our last podcast, where I would sympathize or hear what you're talking about.
Yep.
That would resonate with that is, I think we're often drawn to truth is just reduced to one pole or the other.
Now you're going where I'm going in terms of how we got where we are as a culture.
Right. So there's two, it's all this, or it's all that.
This is accurate. This is inaccurate. This is factual. This is lie.
But what's interesting to me then is so much of the tension comes between two things that are both true. Two things that are both unconcealed. They're revealed, and the tension we want to avoid, we want to stay out of. But I think I said this last time that almost everything now, it seems to me, I see time and time and time and time again where there's two true values, and we're finding our way in those values. There's two truths or realities, and that go together, and we're wrestling with God to figure out how they go together, how they work together. So the idea that where some might go, dualism, that you can't say anything's wrong or that there's nothing that is true. I think it's more specific to say you can have two things that are true. How do they work together? So, I mean, you could have the obvious kind of examples are, was Jesus God? Was Jesus man? Yes. Okay. Both are fully truth. And part of us wants to say, well, it can't be both.
Oh, yeah. That's the same thing with sovereignty or free will.
Exactly.
We're like, well, it can't be both. It's got to be one or the other.
It's got to be one or the other.
Whereas for years, I've lived in this world of, I think it's both. In other words, if God is beyond us, God is infinite, and I believe that he is, and we're finite. Well, by definition, there's certain things we are not going to understand.
Right.
In other words, we're not going to be able to reconcile it. So we live in the tension of both and.
Right. And I think
and that's maybe what we're missing in culture right now. It's either or. It can't be both and.
Where I see in culture, and I don't know how to compare to other cultures, but it's just really pervasive right now is, and I've seen that in my mind experience growing in the church or some pockets of the church,
Yep.
growing more to almost as exclusivism, that you have to go to one pole or the other, that there isn't any, where we're resisting what is a pretty consistent idea of disputable matters, gray areas, which are the tension between two legitimate values,
And it's interesting. Someone who strikes me as a sort of black and white person, the Apostle Paul, was the one that brought up the reality of disputable matters.
Right.
And it's interesting. He uses as an example some that were from their day, but the very fact that he says now about disputable matters, he's giving us a larger construct for. I just think that there's probably far more of those than we imagine, somewhere between the two poles of right and wrong. Because even when you look at what Paul argues later on in those, I think it's Romans 12 through 14, what he argues in there is, for some it's wrong and others it's right. Now think about that for just a minute.
Right.
This would be wrong for this person, but it'd be right for that person. Having to do with conscience, interestingly enough.
And having to do at some level with how someone seeking to be led by the Spirit feels they ought to go.
Yeah.
And this caution about when you have any person that's navigating a place between two truths that are both in place, that you need to be careful that at some point they're going to have to answer to God. They're drawing a conclusion. But the funny thing that's always been with disputable matters is, well, which are disputable? In other words, where we say, and I think this is that same tension we have to go to God with.
Roger, every time I hear announcers say, well, without question, I think, whoa, you just said without question, but I have so many questions about that thing you just said without question.
Right.
I don't know. It's just a saying now. It assumes that there could be no debate about this thing, and that you're in disputable matters. Some people would go, well, that's not even disputable.
It's just obvious.
The problem is once you say it's not disputable, well, you can't have a dialogue about it because it's not disputable. So it's that thing of, how far do you keep the door open to, okay, let's just say everything's disputable so that we can have a talk about it, so that we can have a dialogue about it.
Right.
When I was doing research on that talk on the origin of man, I loved what maybe I said it 2 weeks ago, but Dr. John Walton says let's approach this talk that I'm about to give with intellectual humility and open-mindedness. And I'm like, gosh, we so need that culturally right now. And again, it doesn't mean that in listening to him, that I agreed with everything he said, because I didn't. But I'm like, but I gained a new perspective.
Right.
My sense of reality was broadened. That's a legitimate space that I didn't think Christians were in. Now I'm still not in that space, but I'm like, I see that. I understand.
But what's so important is, even in areas that we feel are not disputable, there's a danger in my mind,
right,
of shutting down any conversation because even this is where, let's say I'm having a conversation and they don't think Jesus is God. Okay. Yep. Nice guy, exemplary life, love a lot about him, but don't see the God thing. Well, where I can still listen to the person, where I can hear them out, well, why do you think that? What's the, and then that can open up, maybe I can share a thought they hadn't thought about. Maybe they can share something with me that I never thought about, that tension. And it helps me think more clearly. Well, I'm going to go to the scripture here and see, and I'm going to study, and I'm going to read, I'm going to learn. I think the fear is, I love this, maybe what you were saying at one level is, don't let the fear of figuring out what's disputable or not stop us from having conversations. I think the idea that conversations are risky, the conversation about things that we feel like are not disputable, But what if we're actually sending the message that we trust that God's big enough to have dialogue? Do we trust that the Spirit of God is guiding and protecting his church along the way? Are we living more out of a fear that we've got to control things that God actually is supposed to control? So it's not even having to even figure out what are the things I won't ever have a dialogue on, or what are the things that I know are disputable or not. Well, let's have conversations. Let's listen to people. Let's hear what they have to say. Let's even learn where I might learn in talking with someone. I put a point out there and they raise a question I hadn't thought about, where I might say, okay, I still believe this, but actually that reason isn't a great reason.
Yeah.
And
great point.
So now I'm not using that anymore, because actually I see that that's actually a flaw. Idea may be true, but
it's a flawed foundational
support whatever
support for that. So as I've been thinking through that, I realized there's a place in my mind. This is just where I am. And this is a disputable matter,
right?
But in my mind, there's a place for dualistic thinking on certain things, in the sense that I do believe in good and evil. Right. I do believe in God and Satan. It's interesting how often Jesus would even talk about the devil. So I'm, because some people think this is all just, and I'm like, no, I think there's good and evil. I think there's this light and dark. I just don't think everything is one or the other. And so that's that space. I think we have to give people a lot of room to grow, learn, develop. And I have to give myself room to grow, learn, and develop within that. Because I don't want to fall into dualistic thinking all the time. Because I realize, I think coming out of our independent Baptist culture, there was a strong dualistic, things are either right or wrong. And we had to go into like nth degree detail on what exactly was wrong. I remember even not just that rock music was wrong. That was one thing. But then we had a guy that came in and said a certain beat was wrong. Bump, bump, bump. Never forget that.
Syncopation, yes.
Bump, bump, bump. It was a certain syncopation.
Right.
This one. And I'm like, how many songs do you eliminate at that point? How many even sacred songs do you eliminate that have that dumb? And but if dualistic thinking taken to its fullest extent is there is a right and wrong to absolutely everything, and you want to dig further and further and further down, and man, it's just such a rabbit hole.
Right.
So,
right. And there we're even living the tension of one pole is nothing's right or wrong.
Yeah.
Everything's right or wrong.
Yeah.
So you're comically in the tension between those,
in between those,
which is, we still, and this is where I think God gives us the grace, and we can trust the Spirit. There are things that are right. There are things that are wrong. There are things that are of God. There are things that are of the enemy. But how often has the church down through history gotten things? Jesus says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan."
Right.
Just after he'd said, God revealed this to you. In other words,
right.
He actually thought something he was saying was spiritual, right, good.
And it wasn't.
And you know what, God, he was deceived. Innocently. I mean, he had an idea. Right. I realized that part of the beauty of unconcealed is it's been put into the light. We have an idea. Deception is concealing. Lies and falsehood, they're a part is concealing.
It's concealing, right.
Truth is unconcealing. It's revealing what's actually.
It's bringing things into the light. And again, that was such an interesting the parallel between light and darkness. Anyway, and it's just making me think through how often I sometimes stumble into dualistic thinking about everything right or wrong. In other words, even framing sometimes my worldview from a position of right or wrong. And I'm like, I'm more and more moving toward, what if my worldview was not biblical? What if my worldview was not dualistic? What if my worldview was Jesus? And this way of Christ and love. And I was even working with a client in the last week, and I thought about something that they said in session, and I thought it made me, a lot of times stirs my own thinking. And they were talking about loving people because they should versus loving people because of an expectation of reciprocity. And as I thought through that, I was like, well, I'm not sure either of those are where we want to be. In other words, I don't want to love people just because I should. It's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to love people just for reciprocity. If I love you, you'll love me. Jesus talked about pagan relationships work that way. And I realized where God's moving me more is, and it was good for me to see this. I'm just loving people. I'm not loving them because you see what I'm saying? I'm not loving them because I should. I'm not loving them because I'm needing something from them, demanding reciprocity, especially. I'm finding I'm loving people, even people that are very different than me or potentially annoying to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's where the way of Christ supersedes any, I don't know, dualism. In other words, there's no one you can't love.
Yeah.
In other words, if Jesus says he wants you to love your enemies, there's no one you can't love because, there's friends, there's enemies, and maybe there's people in between. But the way of love says, I'm going to love all of them. Anyway, it's been, again, I get like Richard Rohr's weekly newsletter at the end, and he and McLaren talk about this dualism all the time. I'm like, what in the world is this? And I realized as I'm looking at John chapter 4, there's a dualism question asked there, right or wrong. And Jesus finds a space where neither are quite accurate.
Right.
Doesn't matter. This time's coming, it's not going to be on that mountain or in Jerusalem. Has nothing to do with
less
place.
about,
It's about heart.
Yeah.
It's about what's going on in your heart and the trueness, the sincerity of your own heart.
Well, the thing that I think that gets attached to this, what I'll call obsession with right and wrong, that it is this idea that kind of leans to that we think about truth as simply facts. If we think about God's concern is that we're getting things right, almost like a teacher getting answers right, you having and missing the reality of ultimately right or wrong has this very deep core in health. It has this very deep core in spiritual. In other words, the reason we're called to trust Jesus as the Son of God, it is not related to an answer on a test, or this is the God who made us. The reason we're called to follow him, it's when I think about sin, if we simply think about sin as God said a thing and it's getting something right or it's getting something wrong, with this fundamental idea that God is looking to protect us, he's looking to save us, he's looking to get shalom, provide shalom. So less upset, even if I think about the heartbreak about getting something wrong is not that the person, you're getting the facts wrong, you're getting is that if you are wrong about a thing, it's not good for you.
Yeah.
It's maybe even if I talk about calling someone to trust Jesus, it's not my religion being better than your religion. But the way I see my belief about God being superior to your idea that there isn't a God, or it's coming out of a compassion. It's coming out of I have no need to prove to you that I'm right. But if this is true about God, if there is a God who made us, if the core truth about the world is that we're runaways and that repenting and coming back home is the way to life and joy and peace and contentment, I want to share that. I want to get that to people, not
because it's right, but because it's awesome.
It's
for them.
Life.
Yeah. It's like it's like, this is a terrible example, but you got the lottery ticket for them, or they have the lottery ticket and they don't even know it. And you're like, no, look at the numbers. You've got it. It's not because it's just right. It's the right number. That's going to change your life in a potentially positive way.
Because I think it changes the whole tone of, even if we're trying to figure out right and wrong, where we're getting at is we're trying to get at the heart of God about a matter, about what God is saying is good for the world. So again, we're it's not pitting two people, my view versus your view. More, why don't we get together and try and figure out how God is trying to help us, what he's trying to say, what could we be mishearing, what could be misreading that we can figure out together. But the whole heartbeat of it is the whole point around right and wrong. Jesus saying, I'm the truth. Everyone who's on the side of truth listens to me. It's because he made us. He knows the way things work. So right and wrong is not an exercise in which of us is on the right team, which it's more about, are we getting closer to the world the way God wanted it? My words are failing me a little bit, but
yeah, but I think if I look at it in relation even to cooking, some would say there's a right way to cook a thing. Let's say a chicken, chicken casserole. There's a million of them.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I learn about cooking is you've got good, but then you can take good and you can make it better. It's not a right or wrong.
Right.
You can then make it even better, by adding some things. And then there's certain things you can add that make it a little worse. It's not, it doesn't make it, that actually didn't make it better, when we added this thing. So I'm trying to think of the world more in my journey right now in is something not only good, but is there something that's better that I can move toward? This is good. Nothing wrong with this,
right.
But this is it better? Then the question of, is it wise? Because that's a tough one for me. I don't always act in the way of wisdom at all.
How often do you ask that question? Is it wise?
You'd be surprised as I've gotten into my late 50s. Okay, late 50s.
Neither of us were asking that very much.
Oh gosh, no.
In our teens and early 20s.
And some of that's in relation to even in relation to other people. Yeah, I could do this, and there's nothing wrong with doing this. But is it wise? And so this is just my story. This is not necessarily anyone else's story, but I often, in my mind, if I find myself rationalizing is not the right word either. If I find myself ruminating, well, there's nothing wrong with this, then I'm often allowing myself to choose that which is not best, and I'm doing it knowingly.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right.
There's nothing wrong with it. But then in my better moments, I go, yeah, but why would I choose that if I know this is going to be
right
even better? So,
and maybe I think, how did I put it? When I had that light bulb moment, I had this light bulb. I don't remember when it was, but it was X amount of my life I built around the question of, is this wrong?
Exactly. Which is dualistic thinking.
Which isn't a bad question.
Right.
I mean, I don't think it's
not wrong to ask, is it wrong?
But it's not the only question. What Jesus taught, and it's what, even when he was talking about disputable matters.
Our gain is off the chart today. We're hitting the red zone over and over again. Can't wait to hear this one come back.
But even when we're in disputable areas, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
It's on me. I do that every now and then. You used to ask the question, is it wrong?
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
But what Paul was teaching, and is there other questions to ask? Is this helpful? Is this wise?
Is this beneficial to the listener? Is
this beneficial? If I'm just consumed with, oh, it's not wrong, guys, I have the freedom to do that. But Paul says, when we talk about freedom, there are things, yeah, you're free. That's not a,
oh yeah.
But it's, no, but it may not be beneficial. It may not, so it may not be technically wrong. We could even think in our world, again, it's not against the law, but we even know certain points that's not the only question to ask. Is it legal? We could ask at some points, is that ethical, or is that really
moral,
compassionate?
Is that compassionate?
Oh yeah, no, the rules allow you to do that.
Right.
But is that anyway, it's
I was going to say something. I lost my thought too. This is the Lose Your Thought episode of Inglorious Pastords.
By the way, while you were gone.
You mean just a second ago?
On your
my trip. Oh, gotcha.
To Viola of the Dolphins.
Got injured?
Well, yeah. So the quick, and
because I didn't read that article. It came up in my
scroll. I'm just saying it's a very intriguing.
Okay.
So he's in a Sunday night game.
Okay.
He's in a Sunday game. They're playing Miami. Miami is playing Buffalo for the lead in the division.
Sure.
He takes a hit. If you watch the video, he takes a hit in that game. he starts to get up and he kind of shakes his head and then he kind of does this. And then he takes a couple of steps and he just starts to collapse. And then he's held up by a couple of teammates. It's just brutal to watch. It's hard to watch.
Ugh.
So they take him off the field.
Concussion protocol.
Right. He comes back in the second half. Finishes out the game, a game that they win that gives them the lead in the. So they're playing the Thursday night game. And they're playing
4 days later.
4 days later. And he gets tackled and slammed to the turf at one point. And he's laying on the ground. You see his hands he kind of freezes up. There's this almost paralytic seeming kind of an instant kind of a. And well, it's created all kinds of controversy, but it's this where I'm coming into what we were talking about was they go to the protocols. So they send him to the tent and he gets medically cleared. The problem is for so many is when you saw what I and so many people saw, it's like, you kind of know he shouldn't be.
He shouldn't be. Yeah, he shouldn't be.
And there was literally, you saw him collapse. Well, then they said after the game, well, it was a back injury and he had some kind of back. Well, I mean, you just look and there's anything you're seeing about him that looks back injury-ish.
Yeah.
So now there's all kinds of, the Players Association is investigating and,
so it's beyond right or wrong. Is it best? Is it wise?
Well, here is this thing. If
the protocol says you go, sometimes you just still say no.
Right. And intriguingly, and I'm not trying to do a Bill Belichick plug, but one of the things he ended up talking later, he was just asked in general, but he was just talking about, okay, we have the medical protocol, but then he said, then there's got to be a coach's clearance. And he said, there've been people who've been medically cleared and they don't pass the coach's clearance.
Interesting, yeah.
But and I know we're finishing on this, but it's this idea even there of technically they did the right things. Yep. But when you look and say, just looking at your own eyes, looking at, that best for
humanly, was it the right thing?
Right. Is that, and it just talks, here's that tension.
And here's the other tension. I guarantee you Tua wanted to be back in the game.
Oh, absolutely.
So in other words, hey, I'm cleared. I'm going.
Right.
You're not keeping me on the bench.
Which is this whole other very fascinating dynamic where compassion looks out for people's best interest, even if they don't. If they can't, or they don't want to see it. They don't. The reality is that we deal with that interesting tension between freedom. He wants to be out there. Of course he wanted to be out there.
Sure.
He wanted to be out there the next Thursday.
Sure.
But where you say, no, because we love you. No, you can't.
And so that's where I would love to finish. This is where, back to my thing of, instead of living in a world of dualism, let's live in a world of love. Is this the loving thing to do? I'm asking that question. Is this the loving thing to do? And I love that, in Andy Stanley's book, Irresistible, I've talked about it many times, but that's one of the things that he argues is the primary question of people who follow the way of Christ. Is this the loving thing to do? I can do it. I mean, I could argue all day about right or wrongness of it, but is it loving? And if it doesn't pass that test, then I can say, I'm not going to do that, even though I have freedom to do that.
Yep.
Even though I don't believe it would be sinful to do that, but I'm not going to do it. I don't think it's loving.
Yeah.
Or in that sense, the most loving thing. And I realize as humans, we can never know what's most loving, but it's an important question to ask. Is this a loving, even in my relationship with my wife, there's certain things I could bring up all sorts of little annoyances,
right?
But is it loving? Is it helpful? Is it beneficial? And I realize part of the reason Marlene and I do so well these days in our relationship is we're both asking the question, is this the loving thing to do? Yeah. And if it's not, it just doesn't. It may actually be all right, or I could argue this. Right. We just don't. We're living more in that space.
And what I love is I love the fact that God gives us markers that help. Two things: God gives us markers as well as the Spirit to discern in a moment what is loving. Because we run into points where what is loving, we also can't always say, well, it's just obvious. because we can run into that saying, well, a loving thing is obviously to do this. Well,
anytime someone says obvious, it's back to no question. There's
so
no question.
in other words, while I agree with that paradigm, it still doesn't take away the tension of, yeah, loving can go to poles too, where we just say, oh, love is tough love, or all love is total embrace love. And where this has to keep getting us back to what's right or wrong, what's loving, what's not. We have to trust the lead of the Spirit. We have to, and I also would say we have to keep staying in dialogue. Why can't we have conversations around, well, what is the loving thing to do here?
Right.
What is the loving thing with how we deal with this issue or that issue? Anyway, so.
Yeah, good times. So do the loving thing instead of the right or wrong thing. Have you got any ditty?
Well, there wasn't like a rhyme. It wasn't really ditty-ish. It was just sort of like statement-ish.
No, thing rhymes with thing. I've heard songs where they use the same word twice, thing and thing. And it was part of the song. It was Kid Rock's song. Yes, we were trying different things and smoking funny things.
That is true.
It rhymes,
yes.
so it fits.
I'm not sure we want to use Kid Rock as our primary.
Right, I'm just
rhyme
saying,
master.
There's freedom there, Raj. There's freedom. Okay.
Enjoy us some good Kid Rock. Not our best.